Today, we're talking about the Laken Riley Act, and I have a very important guest with me. Cristian Ramos is a national thought leader in media and politics. He has published media analysis with MIT's Media Lab and provided his media advocacy expertise to the Harvard Shorenstein Center. He is a known writer and contributor to NBC News, The Atlantic, Newsweek, The Washington Post, The Hill, and political commentary for The New York Times, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, SiriusXM Radio, and NPR. He was honored to be chosen as a 40 under 40 Latinos in American politics by the Huffington Post, and he serves on the Millennial Action Project Young Leaders Council. Welcome, everybody. Cristian, thank you so much for coming over to discuss a very important topic regarding immigration and how it impacts not just the immigrant community in the United States, but all of us. And we're going to jump straight into it, asking Cristian if he can tell us what the Laken Riley Act does.
Right. So the Laken Riley Act was a hard-right MAGA messaging bill that up until the 2024 election, nobody actually thought would ever see passage or see the light of day. So it's a bill that is actually 8 pages long. And when I say that it's a messaging bill, it gives local authorities and local attorney generals immigration powers that are largely undefined and would change the way that immigration enforcement is done at the local level. And some people may be saying, well, what's the big deal with that? The big deal is it could have unintended consequences, not just for undocumented immigrants, but American citizens, and that it could lead to racial profiling in ways that maybe some people that are voting for this in Congress haven't really fully thought out. Again, it's not a well-written, fully fleshed out piece of legislation currently, and they are trying to have a vote on this on Wednesday.
What I find infuriating is that this has moved so fast, and like you said, this was supposed to be a messaging bill, something like, oh, we stand for this, we stand against this, and now it's something that could impact communities and turn local authorities, local police departments into the ones in charge of immigration. And what is interesting, I learned this morning that even ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, has warned that this bill would be problematic because they do not have the resources to enforce the law. And they would need $3.2 billion in extra funds for the 2025 fiscal year if the bill becomes law. And that would go towards additional beds to detain people. And they would actually also potentially have to release detained migrants because they don't have enough facilities to detain the people that they already have with the ones that would come in if this bill were to pass.
So you're raising a really important point here, right? Because the way that the law currently works, immigration officials are using their discretion to detain people with violent criminal records, right? This law would override that discretion, right? And what that means is the federal government would then have to immediately act on anyone who is caught stealing something over $100, so on and so forth. So then there's only a finite amount of resources available to the enforcement of these laws. So at that point, instead of prioritizing criminals, they're prioritizing people who have these lower thresholds, for lack of better words, shoplifting, so on and so forth. Those people that then get put into the system, and they're no longer out there on the streets looking for violent criminals and so on and so forth. And so if passed, you'll see less individuals in detention who are violent convicted criminals than you see today, because you'll be going after these people who are shoplifters or committing these other things. That's not my opinion. That is the ICE former chief of staff, Jason Hauser, who said that. And he believes that this would actually hinder the ability ICE day to day to do the work of going after violent criminals. So again, this is a messaging bill that hasn't really been fleshed out, hasn't really been thought through, and I'm totally comfortable with enforcing immigration laws, and we should have a discussion about how we enforce interior enforcement, and that we're able to make sure that we get all of this taken in a smart way. But as written, this law could lead to greater racial profiling, lead to people being detained for any number of reasons indefinitely, and that should be scary to everyone, not just immigrants.
And we don't even have to imagine what this would be like. We have had something similar to this in the country before. In Arizona, there's a sheriff by the name of Joe Arpaio who had some policies in place that profiled people racially, and then the immigrant community, regardless of their status, if they were here with documentation or no documentation, even citizens were afraid of any local authority because they would be put into camps. Per my understanding, even people who had papers to be here legally were deported. And it became a nightmare, and the county, Maricopa County in Arizona, was sued, and they're paying an insane amount of money to deal with the repercussions of what Joe Arpaio did in Arizona. And now this would just turn at the national level, right, Christian?
Yeah, you would be letting everybody do this at a certain point. And again, I'm not against immigration enforcement, but there is a reason why there's a separation between the federal government and local authorities. Local authorities aren't given the training, they don't have the budget, they don't have the resources to house people, to identify people's immigration status at the scale of which you are going to be providing them the authority to do so under this law. And so people, again, you arrest somebody, you indefinitely detain them. If you're an American citizen, yeah, eventually they will figure out you're an American citizen, you'll be released. But again, how long does that take? How long does your, potentially your children or your grandmother or your friend or whoever, will they have to sit in a jail cell? Again, they have not been convicted for a crime, right? It's just the suspicion that they've committed a crime, indefinitely detained. How are you doing that without infringing on their civil rights? How are you doing that in a way that isn't racially profiling? I don't see anything in this legislation that takes any of those things into account currently. So I'm not saying that this can't be improved or that they can't figure out how to do this better, but there are some serious questions that they need to answer about how we actually would execute something like this if you were to give local authorities this level of immigration authority.
And I think what you bring up is really important. We are not here to say, oh, you should allow people, immigrants, non-immigrants, regardless of their immigration status, to commit crimes. That is not what we're saying. But it is very important that we understand the importance to separate the local authorities from the immigration authorities, because when there are communities who are afraid to call their local authorities for help because they have a questionable immigration status, or even they don't have the papers to prove that they're here legally. That can be a case. From the National Immigration Law Center, the bill requires the mandatory immigration arrest and detention without access to bail of any undocumented person convicted of or merely arrested for burglary, theft, larceny, or shoplifting related offenses. There is no statute of limitations and no mechanism for the individual to contest their immigration detention in order to resolve the underlying criminal charges against them, if charges were even brought. So that's where we are extremely concerned with what it could be like for immigration enforcement, how this would trample on everybody's rights, because you could be here with the papers, you just were detained and you don't have on you a way to prove, and they can just detain you indefinitely.
Yeah, most people don't carry around their birth certificate. Most people.
I don't.
Yeah, most people don't. Most people don't even know where their birth certificate is. So, all of these things are big questions of how they would actually enforce this stuff and how they would do it in a way that doesn't lead to racial profiling. And I'll be the first to say, if there is a way to do this without racial profiling, then put that in the bill. Put it in the legislation. Make it very clear that this stuff is not going to be done on the basis of a police officer looking at somebody, fitting some sort of profile or description of a quote-unquote undocumented immigrant, and then going from there. Again, we can have conversations about interior enforcement. We can put forward solutions for interior enforcement. We actually should figure out how to do this in a smart, sensible way. This is neither smart nor sensible in the long term.
And one thing that we haven't even gotten to is that this bill was already presented in the House of Representatives, and 48 Democrats voted in favor of this bill. It now moves to the Senate, and this is where we need you, our listeners, to get involved and call your senators and ask them to vote no on this bill. I will provide you with a script in the episode notes so that you can read and know exactly what to do. You can call your senator at the Capitol switchboard at 202-224-3121. Contact your senator and ask them to vote no on this bill. There's a number of Democratic senators who have said that they are possibly in favor. Some of them have said, yes, we absolutely will vote for this bill. And what I find extremely frustrating is that I don't understand how they read the 8 pages of this. Did they read the 8 pages of this? And not come to the conclusion that this would be bad and it would not achieve the goal, like Christian has been explaining very clearly, of really enforcing anything in a way that would make our community safer. This would not make our community safer. It would overwhelm the system.
Right. And then I will just add one quick note here. There are ways to improve the safety of everybody related to immigration, and that is fixing the legal mechanisms for entering and leaving the country, for finding ways to provide status to people that are currently here so that we know who's here and who is waiting to adjust their status in a way that allows them to get right with the law. But if you have a system that doesn't work with so many people that are here, it is rife for abuse. It is rife for not knowing who is actually here in this country, legally or not. And we have to fix that. We have to find solutions that allow us to address the whole system, not these enforcement-only pieces, right? Enforcement is part of it. You have to do interior enforcement, you have to do border enforcement, and then you have to figure out how to deal with the people that are currently here, and I would hope a humane way that recognizes that a lot of these folks are contributing to our country. Not all of them are, right? I will acknowledge that. You know, if you've committed a violent crime, you shouldn't be in this country. That's fine. I understand that. But for the most part, we should be finding a way to deal with interior enforcement, border enforcement, and then the folks that are here that want to contribute and want to be American more than anything else in the world, and who are American in every way but their legal status.
And the interesting thing is that last year there was a bipartisan immigration bill presented, and a very, very conservative Republican Senator James Lankford was one of the main leaders of this effort. And this bill addressed a lot of the points that Christian has been mentioning, like, for example, faster processing, so that the bill would make it quicker to check if people coming into the United States could stay or not. It would add money to agencies that protect the border and help stop illegal drugs from coming in. They had new rules for asylum. There were emergency border closures set in place, so if there were too many people crossing at once, the government could temporarily close the border. There was some help for some immigrants, like Afghans, who helped the United States troops to stay here legally. And there were all these things set up in the bill that the Republicans wanted. And this bill, again, was negotiated by Democrats, Republicans, and I believe one independent senator from Arizona, Kirsten Sinema. And they tanked the bill. They tanked the bill in the Senate. And it would have been a better way to address the immigration concerns than this messaging bill. Like Christian has explained already repeatedly, it does not have a way to break down how all these different scenarios would be handled, because it's an 8-page bill. In 8 pages, you can't explain what you would do in all these potential scenarios that would come up when you have 50 different states enforcing immigration in 50 different ways.
Yeah. No,
I get very passionate about this.
No. And, my last thing I'll say is that Lankford bill was not perfect. It is far better and more thought out than this Laken Riley bill. And so, again, I'm not going to say we shouldn't pass, some version of this bill down the line as a part of a broader package with some other stuff that address other issues in the immigration system. I'm saying a one-off bill like this is a death by 1,000 paper cuts to our already messed up immigration system. And we have to find a way to address this in a smart, pragmatic way, as opposed to passing a messaging bill that would make a bad situation much worse in a lot of regards. According to the immigration lawyer Ben Wingard, the Laken Riley Act, ICE would be required to detain immigrants who are arrested for theft, even if the accusation was false and no charges were ever filed. That would give enormous power to unscrupulous employers, abusive husbands, a lot of different groups, right, of people. Let's say you are working at a store and you are undocumented, and your employer, for whatever reason, decides to say that you are stealing from the company. You can then be detained without a trial, without being charged for anything, and held indefinitely until you are removed from the country. Let's say you're in an abusive relationship and your partner, for whatever reason, decides to take vengeance on you, they can say this person committed a crime against me, call the police, and without having to prove anything, that undocumented person will be indefinitely detained and removed from the country without having done anything wrong. So on its face, there are some really big issues with the legislation as it's currently written.
And that's just 2 examples. We can probably come up with 100 different other scenarios of how somebody with a vendetta against somebody that looks like an undocumented immigrant, whatever that is in their mind, could just send authorities, not even immigration authorities, against this person to be held, like
Right.
Christian said, indefinitely without any proof of them committing a crime. So I have a question for you, because I'm hearing that some senators might be open to debating this bill if they can add things to the bill to make it like more palatable, let's say. Like, why are we hearing that some senators, Democratic senators especially, are warming up to this bill?
Not to get too wonky, but whoever controls the Senate can control the amendment process. So a bill in and of itself is 8 pages, and some would argue we can make this bill much better if there's an open amendment process, which will allow us to add this amendment, that amendment, so on and so forth. Senate Republicans are not going to give an open amendment process because they don't want to turn it into like a full-on immigration bill. They want to pass their messaging bill. And so maybe they will allow 2 amendments from Democrats, 2 amendments from Republicans. I don't know. I'm very skeptical that they allow any amendments because they have to pass this thing. They want to pass it. They want to have a vote on it on Wednesday. So
2 days from when we're recording, by the way.
to do that, you can't have an open amendment process because it becomes, a much bigger, longer process. That's where, again, I feel like, yeah, of course, let's have the debate, let's have a conversation, but let's not do it in
On this
48
bill.
hours.
Yeah.
Let's find a way to actually have an open conversation about this and allow people to offer amendments and try to make this bill better. Yeah, okay, of course.
Thank you for tuning in to Latino Lens. I hope this episode gave you a fresh perspective and maybe fired you up to take action. Remember, all of the information you need is going to be available in the show notes or the description of this video in YouTube. If you found some value today, don't forget to follow the podcast, subscribe to my Substack, share it with a friend, and leave a review. It helps more people join in our conversation. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, let's keep our lens focused on change.